everybody, we are live. It is Wednesday, it is 11 a.m. Eastern, it is 4 p.m. in the UK, and it is 1 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia, which is where our special guest is joining us from today. We have got an amazing show. I can see people coming in from all over the world. I can see Tanya, I can see Nicola, I can see Mena and Lynn, and people coming in from all corners of the world. It's so exciting to see you all. Today, we're going to be talking about human mobility. So in a lot of the shows recently, we've been talking about tech, and we're going to be talking about tech again in other shows. But today, we want to concentrate on human mobility. At the end of the day, everything we do is about ensuring that a person and that person's family, where appropriate, is moved as seamlessly and as hopefully with as little trauma as possible from one country to another. But things can go wrong. And what we want to talk about is some of those human issues that happen when people move. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. I'm sure that everybody in the audience has got their own stories. So please, everybody, you know how it works. Just join in the conversations we go through today. Write in the comments box. Tell us who you are, where you are, what you're doing. Say hi to your friends. And as we get into the big discussion, just tell us a bit about your own circumstances and what experiences you've had. And we're really going to try and crowdsource some thoughts about what goes on in the world of what I'm calling human mobility. Now, don't forget, everybody, of course, that if you want your credits, you can get credits. And we're offering credits from Worldwide ERC. Many thanks to our friends. So if you want your GMS credits, your CRP credits, also if you want your HRCI credits, and your SHRM credits, again, they're there. And many thanks to our good friends at Rocket Mortgage who organize those credits for us. I'll leave that up there just for a few moments. So if you do want those credits, then just quickly take a screenshot or jot down the number or get your camera out or whatever you want to do. So that is today's show. We're talking about human mobility. And then next week, we've got another fascinating show. And we're going to be talking about a subject we've talked about a bit before, but we're going to be talking about what we're calling revolutionizing mobility. And what we're talking about there is how you can use artificial intelligence and our old friend ChatGPT to actually create a dynamic policy. And we're talking here specifically about Core Flex. And we're going to have a whole show on Core Flex, but showing you how you can develop that policy using some of the latest technology. And then again, use that technology to manage that policy and use artificial analytics and predictive, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, all sorts of really cool stuff. So there's some great stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks. But what about this week? What's been happening in this week? Well, we always like to share a little bit of breaking news. So let's see what's been happening in the last 7 days in global mobility. So congratulations to everybody who's been promoted, everybody who's changed job, lots of interesting new jobs up there. Congratulations to those people who have been attending events. I know there was a really good GME Live event in Jersey City just yesterday. So well done to all the organizers of that. I hear that was a great event. Euro is going on even as we speak out in Dublin, and congratulations to everybody attending Euro. Again, I'm hearing great things about it. And then next week we have the FEM event in Dallas in conjunction with UTD. So that sounds like a great event, and congratulations to everybody involved with that. What we're going to do now, of course, is we're now going to move on. And I should also say congratulations to all our change makers. We've got some great new change makers joining us again this week, so big shout out to them. But what we're now going to do is we're going to talk about immigration. And as ever, our guest immigration expert is the one and only Julia Onslow Cole. Julia, hi. Now we need you to come off mute, Julia. You're on mute. So Julia's here. Everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's say a big welcome to Julia Onslow Cole. Who another week, another city. Where are you today?
I'm in New York because I was at the GME event yesterday, which was really fantastic.
Cool. And I know you're doing big picture stuff today. So tell us what you'll be talking to us about today.
Yeah, so yes, I want to apologize for everyone that was at GME yesterday. I can see Siobhan is here because I did actually cover this in much more detail yesterday at GME. But I did want to say something about the current geopolitical situation, because it is against that situation and the global economy that we really look at talent management. So I thought it would be really helpful if I just could pick a few points out. And I can see Davika's here, and she was at GME yesterday. So it was really lovely to see so many of you there.
Okay, so tell us about the issues that we're talking about then.
Yeah, so someone coined the phrase really recently that we're in a really strange place in the world. And he said that a really good way of capturing what's happening is post-pandemic hedonism meets geopolitical headwinds. And basically, what that means is that businesses coming out of the pandemic are really desperate to push their growth agendas. But at the same time, there's a lot of things happening geopolitically that there's a worry that business quite hasn't got to grips with it. And if you're responsible for talent management strategies, you're actually doing these strategies and executing over this rather concerning situation where you have, a really major push for growth, but then these geopolitical headwinds. And if you ask and you look at the CEO surveys, the number one issue of what's keeping you up at night is the situation with China and Taiwan. And one of the US generals in January said that he thought by 2025, that might be the time when China would actually invade Taiwan.
2025, so that's just 2 years away.
Yes, and he had a really good, reason as why it would be then. But I think the issue that we're seeing is, we've talked on Benevo a lot about China because it's very important. And we've talked about how post-COVID, there was a real push by Xi Jinping, who's taking his unprecedented third term to get the growth back into China after their disastrous zero COVID policy. And what's happening is that he has been very successful. And if you look at the first quarter of this year, GDP has risen by 4.5%, which is really outstanding compared to the rest of the world. So what we're having is a situation where American companies in particular and America as a whole is actually having a very restrained policy when it comes to China. We're seeing companies like Apple move out of China, diversifying their supply chains, moving things to India, which is soon to become the most populous country in the world. But European countries are taking this much softer approach. And the fact that China is doing so well economically makes them hard to ignore. And for example, Volkswagen announced a couple of weeks ago that they're building a €1 billion research center in China. So the sort of worry is...
this could be quite a risky thing for them to do.
Yes, it's just that this shows the kind of, this phrase is so good because it's like post-pandemic hedonism. Let's rush to invest, but, look at these headwinds, which are very concerning, and they will have a direct impact on talent management strategies. The other thing to say is that we did see post-COVID, and we talked about this a lot of talent went into Singapore and places like Vietnam. And I did a special focus on Vietnam the other day because it seems really quite mad, but Vietnam are ratcheting up their immigration rules when I can't really understand why, because they should be taking advantage of all the investment that has gone into Vietnam. But with that situation, it's actually making it quite difficult for clients. And then you see, and we've been talking about this, the new Compass points-based system and the ratcheting up of the fair consideration framework in Singapore. So again, because of what's happened and the desire to protect resident labor, there's quite a lot of headwinds around there. And then in the US, we've seen the banking crisis, the regional banking crisis. There was a concern that would actually get worse. It looks like deposits have actually calmed down. There's less of an outflow, but still the banking sector is a bit weakened. We've seen the layoffs, particularly in the tech sector, and that's affecting immigration policies, particularly around your green card programs. And then just sort of coming back into Europe, there is a gradual growth trend in Europe, but complexities around posted worker notifications. We still have an ongoing war with Ukraine. And then the situation turning to the Middle East, as we all know, is booming, absolutely booming. And we're having numbers of infrastructure companies, management consultants going in particularly to Saudi, but the rules are very, very complicated. And, that too is causing issues. So just as a summary, I just wanted to say that, as global mobility moves much more into the talent management space, it's really important to try and keep track of these geopolitical and global economic movements, because these are what's going to affect companies' growth strategies, and they're going to affect directly talent management strategies and also what you'll do about crisis management.
Okay, absolutely fascinating, Julia. What I'm seeing here is that on the one hand, we've got the corporations who want to expand as much as possible and globalize. And on the other hand, we've got the nation states who may have very, very different agendas, be it protective, indeed being expansionist. But so we've got this conflict going on. And the interesting thing about all of us in our industry is that we sit at the intersection between what our countries want to do and other countries want to do and what our corporations want to do. So I think, if there's a global village out there, then we could form a band. We could be the global village people. I think, but we are at that interesting intersection. Anyway, fascinating talk, Julia. We're now going to move on to talk about tax, something a little bit more sort of in the detail from the high level here. So Julia, many, many thanks. We're going to be bringing on Julie Barron and Tina Schrob from Vialto, but everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's say a big, big thank you to Julia Onslow-Cole, and welcome onto stage, Julie Barron. Hey, Julie, good to see you. Good to see you. So tell me, what are we going to be talking about today? And tell me who your guest star is that we're going to be bringing onto stage.
Yeah, and she's a real star. So today I have Tina Schrob, who is one of our employment tax specialists at Vialto. She's based in New York, so she's going to be talking to us today a bit about an increase in New York audits that we're seeing at the employer level and what companies can really do to assess the risk of one of those audits.
Okay, so let's bring Tina on the stage. Everybody, hit that heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and for the very first time, let's bring onto the stage Tina Schrob. Hey, Tina, how are you doing?
Thank you. Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure to see a new face, and especially a new face from Vialto Partners on our stage. So, Tina, what are you going to tell us a bit about New York audits and what's going on in your world?
Yeah, so we are actually seeing some renewed focus from New York State on employer withholding tax audits. So, as many of you may know, New York audits are not new. New York has been very active for several years in auditing employers on state income tax withholding as well as other tax types. And that will continue. So what we've seen recently over the last couple of months are audit notices for the post-COVID period. So we have seen New York State issue audit notices for the 2020 through 22 audit years. Many employers were audited for prior years, but we did see New York State ask employers to close out audits through 2019 in an effort to start new audits for the 2020 through 22 years. And so New York State will continue to focus on many of the same areas that they did previously. I think probably some of the largest risk areas that we had seen in previous New York audits included a review of short-term business travelers. So New York employees who were non-New York employees who may have traveled into New York State. New York has a de minimis threshold of 14 days in which time the employer is required to withhold New York State tax. And so that was...
I think all these work from home people, is that causing you a bit of a problem?
Yeah, so the remote
problem, yeah.
Yeah, the remote workers are the newer area of focus for the state. So in addition to short-term business travel, which will continue to be focused, but in these new audit periods, as you can imagine, not as many employees were traveling for business purposes, during those COVID years. And so the state is sort of shifting its attention to focus on remote workers, primarily because New York has what's referred to as the convenience of the employer rule. And that is where non-resident employees of New York are assigned to a New York work location and work remotely from their home for their convenience, for the employee's convenience, rather than as required by the employer. And so New York, the New York rule states that those days worked remotely from home are actually New York days and should be subject to New York taxation, even though the employee is not actually working in New York. And so that seems to be the latest area of focus that New York will have on these new audit periods.
And obviously the authorities are being really understanding and helpful and doing everything they can to make it more easy.
Especially the people who moved to Florida. They love those people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's going to be the area of focus. And as you can imagine, in the other states where the employees live and are performing services, there are instances where that state will also require taxation. So it's resulting in some instances in double taxation for employees who are still connected or assigned to a New York work location, but who are working remotely in another jurisdiction. So very challenging for employers to manage, mitigate the risk, and truthfully message to the employees what the potential implications are going to be, right, to the employee from a tax perspective. Nobody wants to pay double tax in two different jurisdictions on the same income.
Nobody wants to pay single tax, let alone double. So what should people be doing practically to sort of ensure that they don't have a problem?
Yeah, so employers should review their current remote work policies. To the extent they have remote work policies, they should take a look at how their employees are set up in the payroll system. So for employees who are set up as remote workers or even hybrid workers, those employers should take a look at what their resident address is, what their assigned work location is, and how they're being withheld tax. In which jurisdiction are they being withheld tax? And to the extent they're not being withheld New York state tax, then ensure that the employer has all the proper documentation to substantiate that the employee's home is in fact considered their assigned work location and not New York. And if New York is considered their assigned work location and no New York tax was withheld, then that's a potential risk area that the employer needs to consider.
Okay, so thank you for that. Here's a comment from Drew Phillips. So many rules to track, even within the US from state to state. Thank you for shedding light. Very challenging for sure, which probably takes the words right out of my mouth. Thank you so much for that, that wonderful update, Tina. And as ever, thank you to Julia. We're now going to move on and talk about, I'm going to bring Tally onto stage, but we're going to talk about the top 100 diversity initiative that we've got going on. Nominations for that have now closed. We're going to be releasing the list and the special episode of the show on May the 17th. But what we did say beforehand is that we were going to choose one of the people who nominated and actually bring them on as a guest on the show itself on the day, on the May the 17th. So let's find out now. If you watch this video carefully, you should be able to see who our guest nominator is going to be. But as we're playing that video, we're going to say goodbye to Julie and to Tina, and we're going to welcome to the stage Tally, our producer. So everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's thank Tina and Julie for their great update, and let's learn a little bit about the Top 100 Diversity Initiative.
Hello, Brian.
Hey, and many thanks as ever to our partners in this Top 100 initiative, which are Vialto partners, Fragaman, ITX, and Rocket Mortgage. And of course, we've got the new announcement today of who our guest nominator is going to be. So tell
and
us
we
a
can
bit
actually
about that.
see all of them. Yeah, we can actually see all of them here because we now have the run-up
group, what a fine group of
yes,
mobility
for the big reveal.
professionals.
Yes. So Kelly West from the Miles West group will join us for the big reveal show, as well as Simon Davis from ITX and Brittany from Rocket Mortgage and Derek from Vialto and Siobhan from Fragaman. So we're going to have a wonderful lineup, and of course, that's just the little thing. It's the big thing is the list and who's going to be the 100. Top 100 diversity champions. So that's on May 17.
Absolutely. And when Kelly's on the show, she's also going to be telling us a little bit about a thing that she and some others have set up called the Mobility Collective. If you don't know about it, it's worth going on her profile and checking it out. But she'll be telling us a bit about that on the 17th of May.
Definitely.
So big shout out to Kelly and the others who's setting that Mobility Collective up.
Definitely. So the next thing I wanna say is last week I invited you to part 2 of the Mobility Masterclass, and this week tomorrow actually is the part 3 and last part of the Mobility Masterclass, and I'm going to share the link to register in the comments. It's a corporate only, but it's really interesting, and I recommend everyone to join. Last thing that I wanted to mention is that we deployed the employee-initiated move pulse survey. So we would like to hear about your experience with employee-initiated moves, and we may dedicate a show to that. But in any case, anyone who fills up the survey would be the first to get the results. We'd probably also publish it to everyone, but the participants will get the results first. So I invite you, and I will send the link to the survey also in the comments.
Okay, so let's get on. Our very special guest today is Keryn Mendes. Now, I want you all to give her the biggest welcome ever we've seen on this show, because it's nearly 1:30 a.m. in the morning in Melbourne where Keryn is, so she may not even be awake. So let's see if we can wake up. We can wake up Keryn, and please, everybody, put your virtual hands together. I want to see lots of applause, lots of hearts, lots of love. Let's light up this this screen as we bring onto stage one of the best known, best loved people in the mobility industry, all the way from Melbourne, Australia, Keryn Mendes. Are you awake?
I'm awake. Good morning.
Okay. Next. So, what a comment there that came up. I missed that one. Good morning, they're saying. Let's hope you don't wake your children up.
Oh, fingers crossed. I closed their door.
So, I must tell you, I once did a meeting, one of those telecom meetings back in the day with some people from Melbourne, and it was about this sort of time, maybe even slightly earlier. But it was quite clear that they'd all been out to the pub when they came onto this call, and they were completely blotto. Now, I'm just assuming, though, that you are one. I just want to check. You know, you haven't been, you know, out at the pub or anything. Okay, so
no,
good.
No. Maybe if you had caught me yesterday for Anzac Day, but not today. No.
Okay. So, Keryn, we're going to be talking about human mobility, and we're going to be talking about maybe some of the funny things, some of the sad things that have happened. But tell me, what do you mean by this phrase, human mobility?
I think human mobility to me, Brian, is effectively why I got into this industry and these roles in the first place. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of your viewers. Whether you deliberately chose to go into global mobility or you ended up accidentally in mobility like myself, I think that connection to helping people and being at that cross intersection between a major life move and a major career move. For me personally, it's an honor to be in that role and to support people in that role. But I think, you know, most importantly, we have a duty of care as practitioners to make sure that they get from point A to point B safely, and for our organisations in a most compliant fashion. We also need to remember as well that any hiccups along the way have personal impacts to these people. So whether it's their passports or whether it's their tax returns, you know, we need to make sure that we have all our ducks in the row before we send them on their way, because it has a very real world impact to them as a person and as an individual.
Yeah, because it's pretty traumatic, isn't it? I mean, hey, Keryn, really happy to see you on the show, says Mena. But I mean, it is very traumatic, isn't it? Because you're basically giving somebody a new life. You're sort of you're uprooting them from the safety of where they live, and not just them, oftentimes their families as well. And then you're sending them, you know, halfway across the world, or maybe it's not that far, but into a new world where they need everything again, you know.
That's right. And you're the face of the organisation, Brian. You're their lifeline.
Yeah. And you want it to be a good experience. And we all know stories of assignments that have failed. And often they fail. Well, the reason they fail isn't because of work. It's because of the non-work factors, whether it's an unhappy spouse, whether it's homesickness, whether it's, you know, in some sort of cultural problem, you know, but there's reasons these things fail. But our job is obviously to, you know, both from their point of view, from the organization's point of view, is to make sure that it's as friction-free and as smooth as possible. But tell us a bit about yourself, Keryn. I mean, I mentioned, you know, you're a very experienced professional. How long have you been in the industry, and how did you get into mobility in the first place?
I've been in an in-house corporate role for 17 years. I've worked across a lot of different industries across the APAC region and touched EMEA and the Americas regions as well. For me, how I got into mobility, and I kind of referenced it before, was somewhat accidental, somewhat not. I ended up getting catching a ride in a car with the global mobility manager at Boeing Australia at that point. I was a HR administrator, kind of new to the organisation, and he was sharing with me some of his feedback around his program and what he was doing. And I made some kind of cavalier suggestions, not knowing anything about the mobility industry or having heard of what mobility was before. And he said, well, we've actually got a role going, you should probably apply. So me being, sprightly and in my 20s, went back to my desk, did a little presentation with the headline of why I am great, as you would do in your 20s, with no shame.
Well, hang on. You didn't actually say why I am great, did you?
Yeah, I think I had a big smiley face emoji on the front cover as well.
Oh my God. And you still got the job.
I did, actually. I did. Don't know how much competition I had to be
on my resume. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and that launched me into my career, and I'll give a shout out to that particular manager. That was Aaron Guthrie. He's now at Woolworths in Australia. So hi, Aaron.
Okay, are you out there, Aaron? If you are, we're sending you love.
But yeah, so yeah, great launch pad, great mentor to get me into the program, and a great program in itself to start learning the ropes on.
Okay, and that was sending people. Boeing at that point for you were based in Brisbane. Is that right?
Yes, correct. And, that was based in Brisbane, and and that was
from Seattle. Is it Seattle, Boeing, their headquarters?
Yeah, so Boeing in Australia at that point was the defence arm of Boeing. So we were bringing a lot of people, primarily from Seattle into Brisbane, and also into Amberley, which is about an hour's drive, kind of out towards the country from Brisbane. So a lot more regional.
Okay, well, let's get into our first question to do with human mobility. Okay,
sure.
You're moving people from what, on the face of it, are two very similar countries, from the USA to Australia, from Seattle to Brisbane, which have got quite a few similarities in a way. Intercultural challenges. I mean, what sort of things were you seeing on what, on the face of it, is actually quite a similar environment?
Yeah, look, it's often, and I'm sure a lot of people watching will agree, there's a big misconception when you're moving people between the UK or America and Australia or New Zealand, that perhaps cultural training or cultural induction is not required. I couldn't disagree more. When I was at Boeing, we actually did the cultural training ourselves in-house. And they would be hour-long sessions to sit with the individual and their partner to go through that. And, and there's lots of misconceptions around, the old joke in Australia is, do you ride kangaroos to work or to school? No, we don't. But putting all seriousness at the forefront, I think the biggest difference for us, particularly with the program at that point, was we were sending out from Australia to Seattle quite junior level engineers. They were picking up lots of skills in Seattle, and they were coming back 7 years later back to Australia with, they might have gone out single and they're coming back with a wife and 2 kids. And we're taking them from the landscapes of Seattle, particularly the family, and we're bringing them to regional Queensland, which is a completely different landscape. You've got seaside kind of versus country, and it became very apparent to us very quickly from a retention and an employee engagement and happiness to the family's perspective that we needed to get on the forefront with our cultural training at both ends. So we did pre-cultural training before they left, and then we did touch points and cultural training once they'd settled in as well to help them integrate back into the community.
Okay, so what would you say were the major cultural differences that they were facing going either way, kangaroos aside?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, look, a lot of it, I think, is the unspoken cultural differences that I think Australia has with a lot of other countries. We are fairly laid back as a culture. And there are different practices, whether it's culturally in the community or whether it's in the workplace, that may be a little less formal than some other countries. And so for us, it was quite evident that we needed to make sure that we particularly were supporting the families when they were integrating into the community, where in a regional setting, you often find in most regional towns that everybody knows everybody. And so when you're bringing new people into the situation, you need to make sure that you're helping them integrate. So for us, that was a big focus area. And it wasn't so much the language or necessarily even the cost of living or the services that were available. They were fairly comparable across the locations. It was mainly just the understated cultural differences that we needed to focus on.
Okay. I mean, that's really, that's really important, this sort of dealing with the cultural challenge. And were you providing support to the assignees, or did you include the families as well?
Yeah, both, absolutely. Our programs, they always extended to both. We encouraged, obviously, the partner to come along in some instances where the children were of a certain age and older, where they could understand the concepts that we were explaining. We would bring them in and have discussions with them as well.
Okay, and I've got a question for the audience. I want to ask the audience out there, what's been your most traumatic / difficult relocation experience? So tell us anything that has happened in your world. Obviously, don't name names of companies or clients or people or what have you. Let's try and keep this relatively anonymous. But what's been your most difficult relocation experience? And also, here are some of the things that you might want to sort of talk about as we go through. Evacuations, where there's been a natural disaster or a war or some other conflict. So that's, if you like, one category, the evacuation. Another category might be the family or the medical emergency. Somebody might be ill, somebody, heaven forbid, might have died. There might be lack of medical care. Another category, assignee arrest or deportation. Something there, somebody might have breached local laws or been set up on some charge or something. So tell us about that, and we'll try and put your answers up there. And then also, there might be any other area. So, I'm guessing from your point of view, Keryn, you've been through a few of those in your time. Not personally, yep. You're assignee.
No, I think I've probably had something in every category that's scrolling along the bottom of the screen at one point or another in the last 17 years.
Okay, well, let's just talk about a couple of them.
Sure.
And I see, let's just see, let's put up some of these comments as they come up. Let's put some of them on the screen. I see Peter Knight has made a comment there. Let's pull that one up, and some of these other family and medical issues in Egypt. So we'll get into some of these sorts of issues. Susie says, the hardest case I managed was repatriating the wife and employee that had committed suicide. Oh my
that's tough.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Finding a doctor for my very sick child in the middle of the night. And this is where it does become house hunting in Europe in the summertime. Yeah. What's this one? Relocating families who are still in Ukraine when they're invaded, trying desperately to get them out. That's what was very pertinent at the moment, not just in Ukraine, but what's happening in Sudan at the moment as well. This is very, very live, even in the last couple of days. So, Keryn, from your experience, let's take about evacuations. Now, I know you've had problems previously in your career with, I think you said Papua New Guinea. Do you want to just tell us a bit about what was happening there?
Yeah, sure. So we had a assignee in my career who was based in Papua New Guinea. It was during a time of a bit of civil unrest. There was a little bit of protesting going on. It escalated quite rapidly, I think within the space of about a week, to the point where the assignee, and she was quite seasoned as far as being assignee, she'd had done assignments before in different locations, but to the point, I think, where some of the protesting had moved outside of her temporary accommodation. She'd been given recommendations to stay indoors. But it had got to a point where even she felt quite uncomfortable, and of course reached out to us to understand what the opportunities were for her to repatriate. Obviously taking into consideration the impacts on the business and the project deliverables she was there to do, but first and foremost, of course, her health and safety. And so it was just a simple matter of organising the logistics to extract her out of that location. It was a no-brainer, to be honest with you, Brian. It wasn't really up for discussion at the end of the day from the regional HR lead's perspective.
Okay, and if out there you've got comments on the things that Keryn is saying, please do, again, feed them into the comments box and we'll try and bring them on screen and bring them to the conversation. Lorraine Jennings, oh, how true. Never a dull moment in mobility. I mean, in your 17 years, has that been your experience, Keryn?
Definitely. There's been, and I think it's particularly for mobility professionals, we're quite hard on ourselves because our whole job is to make sure that we cross all our T's and dot all our I's, right? And so we're there to mitigate risk as much as possible for the organisation, but also for the individual. But sometimes things are just literally outside of your control. And so, the Ukraine piece is a great example of that. I know colleagues in the industry who have had to do some pretty amazing things to get people into places and out of places. And so I think, for us, it's particularly heartbreaking when things go wrong despite our best efforts. I think we take that quite personal.
And let me just bring on some of the other comments here. So here's one from Mark Rabe. I think he's out in Texas from memory, Mark. He said, had a horse die in a blizzard during transport and was petrified to call the transferee and share the news. I mean, actually, that raises a really good point. Is that sometimes, you do have to break really sad news or difficult news to the assignees. I don't know whether you've had experience of breaking bad news to your assignees, maybe goods lost in transport or horse dying. I mean, it's not funny.
Yeah, I've moved a horse during a horse quarantine period. That was a bit tricky, but it didn't die, which is a good thing. But I've had containers fall off ships. I've had containers stolen out of yards, and then be found on the side of the road, pillaged and half empty. It's never a good story to have to deliver. But again, if you have the right, protocols and policies in place, then hopefully you're ready to deliver that news, and then a solution or a comfort or a recommendation that follows shortly thereafter to bring some sort of relief to the individual.
And the problem is, in a way, it's always our fault that, you can have 99 moves that go completely smoothly and no one really says thank you. Thank you, that was a great move. But you have one where the container breaks or something happens, or the wonderful furniture gets damaged or something, and all of a sudden especially if it's somebody senior, it gets escalated throughout your company, and the vendor's name is mud, even though they've been wonderful for everything else.
Yes.
So here are some other comments. Here's one from Ebony Thompson. She says, I had an employee pass from a heart attack whilst on assignment with his wife. Oh my God. And no doubt you had to sort of repatriate or find ways of repatriating the family and the body and doing with the legals that would have been involved.
I had one of those, Brian, where we actually, for religious reasons, we couldn't repatriate the individual back to their home location. And so, makes it really tricky from an insurance perspective. We actually had to repatriate them to their birth country for religious reasons so that they could be buried in a timely manner. So that required a heap of negotiation with the insurer themselves to overcome kind of the standard T's and C's associated with your coverage.
Yeah, and I remember one some years back where it was actually in the US, but the parent, it was a family of four, the parents, both of them died in a car crash, and which left two minor children. And then there was a big legal argument about who could bring the children back home, because who was going to have custody, because there was different sets of grandparents. It had to go through the US courts to agree, because the judge didn't necessarily want to leave the children or let the children out of the country or into care until he was satisfied. Just dreadful. Here are some other comments. Here's from Anna Mansalva. She said, having a signee lost a child whilst on assignment is devastating and one of the biggest challenges. And then we've got Kuram here. So many stories to share for people coming to Saudi Arabia, especially for people who are moving for the first time. Not many people know about life in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, so many stories. I mean, let's look at other stories now. I know you had a case of an assignee who hadn't, it sounds quite simple, who hadn't paid his taxes. But that was one that went terribly wrong. Tell us about that story, because in scope of what we've heard, you know, people dying and all that sort of thing, paying taxes is not the end of the world. But this was actually pretty traumatic itself. Tell us about this experience.
Yes. So, well, I mean, to set the scene, of course, this happened on a weekend, like these things always do, Brian, when nobody's at their desk. But this particular,
if something, the S word happens, and I won't use a swear word live on air, but if the S word happened, it always happens at weekends, doesn't it?
Or public holidays, yes.
Yeah. So
no, you're fine. So effectively, it was just a meeting of a failure in communication meets a very compliant country. So it's quite senior individual was leaving Singapore, and as we probably all know, Singapore has been very sophisticated and vigilant in their data sharing between immigration and tax authorities for many years, and this happened many years ago. And it's, I've heard this happen more recently as well, so they're obviously still quite vigilant on it, but essentially that an individual didn't pay their tax bill. It was in tens of thousands of dollars. They went to have their home leave trip to exit Singapore at the airport. They were going through immigration as per normal, and they were essentially pulled aside and detained in one of the side rooms until they were able to raise the funds to pay for the tax debt. I mean, being tens of thousands of dollars, that wasn't going to easily fit on their credit card, and so they had to make the call back to the home country and quite senior up to somebody high enough with a big enough credit card balance to effectively to wipe that and get them out of the country. So,
and why haven't
it wasn't particularly.
Was that a fault of the company, the individual employee, the authorities?
It's a good question. We believe it was a cross between the individual not updating their address with our vendor and those records not being updated, and hence they didn't receive their tax bill.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned not updating your address, which again sounds like a fairly simple thing, a mistake to make. Okay. But we were talking earlier, I mean, you're a bit of the bad luck. You're a bit of the bad luck bear when it comes to having. I
am. I think I'm going to have the shortest career after this show.
We haven't talked yet. I don't know whether anybody else has had experience out there of having their assignees arrested, but we're going to come on to that as a difficult subject now. So, Keryn, tell us about the first one. This was someone who had done something pretty simple. He just hadn't, or not done something pretty simple. He just hadn't sort of updated his address. So tell us about this tory.
Yeah, so this one was based in Russia, again, quite a long time ago, obviously not recent, and made the individual wasn't aware, and obviously we weren't aware. We hadn't briefed him that the local requirement in the particular jurisdiction he was in is that he had to let the local police station effectively know that he was changing address from his temporary accommodation to his permanent accommodation, which is a natural transition for any assignee. So effectively.
So presumably he was fairly new there. I mean, temporary accommodation is typically 30 days or something.
Yes. So he can't have been there any more than 4 weeks. And so he was driving to work down the highway, got pulled over by the police, and effectively arrested on the roadside and detained in a local police station for a day or two. I can't quite remember how long it was, but at which point, the global mobility team that I was part of was kind of pulled off, and the legal team kind of took ownership of trying to support the poor individual. But yeah, it was simply just a case he had to lodge his change of address from Temporcom to permanent accom. That was missed. It wasn't actioned, and yeah, they were obviously quite vigilant in picking that up, and he went through the judicial system in Russia accordingly.
And how long was he detained for?
I think it was for a few months, certainly enough that, the project was kind of put on pause that he was working on, and that he was, certainly impacted from a personal perspective, not only his passport, but from obviously, having a quite a traumatic experience going through all that. But yeah, I think it was a matter of a couple of months.
At least he got free accommodation.
Yeah. Yes, probably not the one that he wanted.
Yeah. But all joking aside, so that is a real thing. As Lorraine Jennings just put, never a dull moment in mobility. But that really is something that ought to be written out large there, because I suspect that making sure you notify of a change of address on a timely basis is the sort of thing that is easily missed. And this guy obviously was just unfortunate that he got picked up before he registered. What I don't know, I'd be interested in either your view or the audience's view, is we talked about that happening in Russia. I don't know how many other countries that would happen with as well, whether, how rare that is or how commonplace it is that if you don't notify the authorities, you will get, incarcerated for a short while whilst it's happening.
Well, it's a great plug for destination services, right? To be made aware of these things and these local requirements, and yeah. Okay.
And as if that's not bad enough, let's come on to arrest number 2.
Yes.
Because this was even more traumatic. So tell us what happened. This was in China, I believe. So tell us what happened here.
Yeah, again, this is quite some time ago, but it was a regular day. I woke up, turned on the news in the morning, and there was my assignee plastered over the local news. Obviously, hightailed it into work to see what had happened, and one of my long-term assignees had been arrested in the middle of the night, hence why I kind of made the news before I'd heard about it. In China, and they'd gone into his home, pulled him out in the middle of the night in front of his wife and kids, he was detained in China for various reasons and charges, and then he was processed through the judicial system there as well, and I think he ended up spending approximately 10 years in jail in China for that particular incident.
10 years? Some sort of financial irregularity, was it? Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
Yeah, look, at the time that we went through the process, there was obviously certain things that we can and can't talk about post that episode. But for us, certainly within the mobility team, the focus, again, when things like this happen in an organisation, mobility are usually kind of removed from looking after the assignee, and you have the appropriate corporate and legal team around the individual themselves. For us, the focus 100% was on supporting the family. Again, that human side to mobility, right, Brian? So for us, it was tricky because given the location, the authorities in China had frozen the family's bank accounts. So that was not an avenue for the family to get any money or to pay their bills with. So we had to look at ways to support them as an organisation outside of that. We then had to look at ways of communicating with them as well. So the emails and phones to the particular family as well had been frozen and sealed, so we couldn't communicate them through those means. So again, we had to come up with, think outside the box as far as being able to support them and make sure that the wife and the children were supported in a responsive way, but also in a respectful way as well, because they'd been through such a traumatic experience. And I think the hardest thing was that they actually wanted to stay in country, obviously, until the process had been seen out locally. whereas it probably didn't make the best sense for them to stay from a safety and security point of view. And so they were repatriated, obviously ahead of the employee.
Okay. Just changing the topic slightly. I know, Keryn, you do an amazing podcast series yourself.
Yes.
Maybe one day you'll turn the tables on me. But tell me a bit about the podcast that you do.
Yes,
where people can tune into it to hear your podcast.
Yeah, sure. It's a podcast called The Working World, and it's got a fantastic neon bright pink logo. You can't miss it. But yes, it's a podcast that I started with my industry colleague, Jamie Lingham, who is the CEO and founder of Absolute Immigration, who is a immigration firm here in the APAC region. And Jamie and I we'd been longtime industry colleagues and known each other for quite some time. Again, having, one of those casual conversations during the pandemic. And we were both a little bit frustrated, I think, with the lack of conversation around sharing ideas, sharing best practices, trying to figure out what the heck to do in the middle of this pandemic, which was kind of moving in 3-month blocks. And we really didn't know what it meant beyond that, particularly here in Melbourne, Australia. As you would all be aware, we were the biggest lockdown location in the world. And so for us to support our assignees out there in the world, we were a bit lost. So we wanted to get the conversation going. I know in some of the other regions in the world that was a lot more fluid, but certainly in APAC it was a little bit stagnant. So we came up with the concept of just starting a podcast, and we wanted just to talk about ideas close to home, the rise of the remote workforce, mobility related topics. We've more recently expanded that to more HR, talent management, cultural well-being topics. But yeah, we always look for speakers, Brian. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you on. But a big shout out to Jamie as well.
And then we've got about a minute or so left. I want to come on to one just very, very quickly, because you mentioned lockdown in Melbourne, which
Sure.
obviously was really tough. But you had people who were detained. That's another whole trauma. Just give us the 90-second version of that.
90-second version of that. So essentially the story behind that is I, again, woke up in my pajamas, made the mistake of checking my emails before I got dressed, and I spent the whole day in my pajamas. So we had a gentleman who was in Vietnam, and he was due to, we were extracting him due to COVID. He was due to fly out in the evening that day. I turned around and looked at the news. Our government basically announced that the borders were shutting, and they gave us a particular deadline. I had 3 phones trying to get him on earlier flights. None of that came to any fruition. And that evening when I was watching the news, there he was, the first person off the plane, going straight into hotel quarantine for 2 weeks.
You really are the bad luck bear. Yeah.
I know. I've never reconciled this before, Brian.
So he was locked up. So you had to support the person who was locked up for, how long was he locked up for? In
2 weeks. And lockdown was, and I'm sure it was bad everywhere, but detainment here particularly was bad. I mean, they were put into 5-star hotels, so don't get me wrong, it wasn't like horrible settings, but there was no minibar. It was all cleared out. You weren't able to send in care packages at that stage because the police would kind of rifle through and take out any contraband items. So it was very restricted in what you could send them. You couldn't just do an Uber Eats and send a pizza to their room. It was quite restricted, and it was quite an unappealing environment from the sense of hotels are not designed to take people for that amount of time, and the walls are quite thin as well. So this particular individual would share with us. They could hear stories of families of 5 shoved into a small hotel room behind them, arguing, kids crying. It would have been a horrible experience to go through, but we provided him a very structured regime with lots of mind-body engagement to keep him as engaged as we possibly could for that 2-week period.
So thank you so much, Keryn. I'm going to bring our other guests back onto stage now. So let me just bring on Julia and Julie and Tina and Tally. So we've got the gang back in town. It's been an amazing show. Thank you so much, Julia, for your geopolitical update. Thank you to Julie and Tina for your New York employment update. Thank you, Talia, as ever, for promoting and producing the show. And especially thank you to Keryn for all those stories. And indeed, thank you to the audience for all those stories they've been sharing. I mean, we sometimes forget all these real stories that are behind, you know, whether we're doing relocation or immigration or tax. But at the end of the day, there are real people who are moving, and they're moving with their families. Fascinating stories. We are back this time next week to talk about revolutionizing mobility and using AI and ChatGPT to actually design and implement a policy. So that's going to be an absolutely fascinating subject. And a really a special thanks to you. I'm just conscious now, it's now 2 a.m. or just after 2 a.m. in the morning for you, Keryn, and you're still awake and buzzing, which is impressive. So we wish you a very good night and sweet dreams. And thank you, everybody. I've been Brian Friedman. This is The View from the Top. Take care, and we will see you all again this time next week. Ta-ra, everybody.
Thank you.